In the heart of a merciless sandstorm on Route 90, Sarah Cohen, owner of a modest roadside restaurant, quietly counted her last 180 shekels, with only 7 days left before losing everything. At her lowest moment, 15 weary guardians of the Negev bikers knocked, seeking shelter. Without hesitation, she opened the door and shared her final meal. By morning, the roar of hundreds of motorcycles filled the air outside her restaurant. Sarah Cohen stood behind the counter of the Oasis Junction restaurant, staring at the stack of crumpled bills in her weathered hands. 180 shekels. That was it. That was all that stood between her and the final notice tucked beneath the cash register, the one that gave her exactly 7 days before the bank took everything. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small restaurant perched on Route 90 in the Judean desert. Sand whipped in thick, angry sheets, turning the world beyond the glass into a gritty, gray void. At 50 years old, Sarah had seen plenty of desert storms, but this one felt different. This one felt like an ending. The kind that sneaks up on you after years of fighting just to keep the lights on. She moved slowly around the empty restaurant, her footsteps echoing off the worn tile floor. The simple plastic tables sat empty, their surfaces scratched from years of use by truckers wiping grease from their hands and families on road trips sharing falafel plates. The coffee pot gurgled weakly, half full of the strong, lukewarm brew that had been sitting there since noon. It was nearly 8 o'clock now, and she hadn't seen a customer in over 3 hours. The place felt like a ghost town, a relic from better days when the highway buzzed with life. Sarah paused at table number 4, Avi's favorite spot. Even 2 years after the cancer took him, she could still see him sitting there, his gentle smile warming the room more than any heater ever could. They had bought this place together 15 years ago with nothing but dreams and a small inheritance from her grandmother, an old-timer from Rosh Pina, the northern village where Sarah's family roots ran deep like the olive trees that dotted the hills. "We'll make it work, Habibi," Avi used to say. Habibi, his Arabic endearment for my love, a nod to the shared history of Jews and Arabs in the land they both called home. His dark eyes would twinkle with optimism. This place will be a light for travelers, an oasis in the desert. Now the lights flickered overhead, threatening to go out just like everything else. The heating system groaned and wheezed, fighting a losing battle against the sharp desert chill that seeped through the cracks like an uninvited guest. Sarah pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and walked back to the counter, where the eviction notice seemed to mock her with its official letterhead and cold, bureaucratic language. The restaurant's old two-way radio crackled weakly in the corner, its antenna bent from years of neglect. Once, that radio had been their lifeline to the trucking community, a constant stream of voices sharing road conditions, warnings about flash floods or wandering camels, and the occasional joke to break the monotony of long hauls. Now, it mostly sat silent, just another relic of better times, like the faded photos of Avi pinned to the wall behind the grill. Sarah opened the register again, counting the money one more time, as if the numbers might magically change. They didn't. 180 shekels wouldn't even cover the electric bill, let alone the 3 months of back payments the bank demanded. She'd already sold her wedding ring, Avi's tools, those well-worn wrenches he'd used to fix rigs in the dead of the night, everything of value they'd accumulated over their 23 years of marriage. This restaurant was all she had left, the beating heart of their shared dream, now sputtering toward silence. The wind picked up outside, shaking the building so hard that the old neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting erratic shadows across the empty booths. Through the window, she could see the sand piling up against the gas pumps, burying them under dark drifts that looked like forgotten dunes in some ancient biblical tale. Route 90 was completely invisible now, lost beneath the storm's fury. Sarah glanced at the clock above the coffee machine. 8:15. Time to close up, flip the sign to closed, and admit defeat. Tomorrow she'd call the lawyer, maybe see if she could work out some kind of payment plan, though she knew it was hopeless. The bank had been patient enough, too patient perhaps, in a country where small businesses like hers were the backbone of roadside life, but often the first to crumble under economic pressures. She was reaching for the light switch when she heard it, a low rumble that cut through the howling wind like distant thunder rolling over the hills of Judea. At first, she thought it might be a heavy army vehicle, those IDF trucks that rumbled through the desert on routine patrols. But the sound was different, deeper, more rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of steel and chrome echoing across the endless sands. Sarah pressed her face to the window, squinting through the sand that clawed at the glass like desperate fingers. At first, she saw nothing but the gritty gray haze. Then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the storm. Headlights, lots of them, piercing the veil like stars refusing to be dimmed. Beneath the lights, the distinctive silhouettes of motorcycles. Big ones, Harleys by the look of them, their frames low and powerful against the wind. The rumble grew louder as the bikes approached, their engines revving in defiance of the gale. Sarah counted 15 machines in total, all riding in tight formation despite the treacherous conditions that could swallow a rider whole. As they pulled into the restaurant's parking lot, their headlights swept across the windows like searchlights from a Hollywood thriller, filling the empty dining room with harsh white light that danced off the chrome accents and worn countertops. Sarah stepped back from the window, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat from one of those old Bedouin festivals her grandmother used to tell stories about. She'd heard stories about motorcycle clubs, seen them in American movies like Easy Rider, where they were rebels with a code, but she'd never actually encountered one up close in the stark reality of the Negev. These men, and they were all men, she could tell even through their heavy desert gear, looked like something out of a nightmare scripted for the big screen. Leather vests scarred by road dust, thick boots caked in sand, helmets that hid their faces behind visors fogged by the storm. They moved with the confidence of people who weren't used to being told no, who carved their own paths through life's rough terrain. The lead rider dismounted first, a tall man with broad shoulders who seemed to command the others without saying a word. He looked toward the restaurant, and Sarah could feel his gaze even through the window, steady and assessing, like a desert hawk, sizing up the horizon. Slowly, deliberately, he began walking toward the front door, his steps measured against the shifting sands. Sarah's hand hovered over the light switch. She could turn off the lights, lock the door, pretend the restaurant was closed. These men wouldn't know the difference. They'd probably just move on, find somewhere else to wait out the storm. Maybe a military outpost or a kibbutz barn. Somewhere that wasn't her problem. Her fragile sanctuary on the edge of oblivion. But as the man approached the door, she saw something that stopped her cold. He was limping. Not badly, but enough to notice. A subtle hitch in his stride that spoke of old injuries, the kind earned from years on the road, or perhaps in service to the nation. Behind him, the other riders were dismounting, and she could see that several of them were struggling too, their movements heavy with fatigue. They'd been riding in this storm for hours, maybe longer, battling winds that could flip a truck and visibility that dropped to zero. They were cold from the biting desert wind and dust that infiltrated every scene, exhausted and probably desperate for shelter. The same desperation Sarah knew all too well from her own long nights, staring at that eviction notice dot. The man reached the door and paused, his gloved hand hovering over the handle. Through the glass, Sarah could see his face clearly now, unmasked by the helmet he'd removed. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 45, with gray streaking his dark beard like silver threads in a tapestry of hardship. His eyes were tired, weathered by years on the road, and perhaps by time spent in uniform, patrolling borders that never seemed to rest. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen enough hardship to recognize it in others. The quiet plea behind a forced smile, the weight of unspoken worries. He knocked 3 gentle raps that somehow managed to be both respectful and urgent, a courtesy that cut through the storm's rage like a lifeline. Okay. Sarah looked back at the 180 shekels on the counter, then at the eviction notice, then at the man waiting in the storm. Avi's voice echoed in her memory, warm and reassuring. A light for travelers, Habibi, an oasis in the desert. It was more than words. It was their vow, etched into the very soul of this place. With a deep breath that steadied her trembling hands, she walked to the door and turned the lock dot. The moment Sarah opened the door, the full force of the sandstorm hit her like a physical blow. Dust swirled into the restaurant in a whirlwind of grit, and the temperature, already cold, seemed to plummet further in seconds with the driving particles that stung like needles. The man standing on her threshold was covered head to toe in sand and fine grit, his leather vest stiff with it, his beard white with the fine dust that clung like frost. But it wasn't just one man. Behind him, Sarah could see the others dismounting from their motorcycles, and her breath caught in her throat. These weren't ordinary bikers. Their leather vests bore the unmistakable patches she'd seen in news reports about Israel's outlaw motorcycle world. The stylized Desert Eagle logo, the Guardian's winged emblem, the words Guardians of the Negev emblazoned across broad shoulders and backs. 15 of them, all massive men with arms thick as date palm trunks, faces weathered by years of hard living under the relentless sun, and the kind of presence that made smart people cross to the other side of the street, or in the desert, veer their jeeps wide dot. The leader, Yigal Golan Baruch, was easily 6 of 4, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a ponytail and a gray beard that reached his chest, giving him the look of a modern-day prophet from the hills of Galilee. Tattoos covered every visible inch of his arms, intricate designs that told stories Sarah didn't want to know, including a faint IDF insignia from his days in the Israel Defense Forces, where he'd served as a paratrooper in the 80s. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a border skirmish or a bar fight long forgotten. And his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, held the weight of someone who'd seen too much and done things he couldn't take back. Behind him, the others looked like they'd stepped out of a gritty action movie set against the red rocks of Petra. One had a shaved head covered in tattoos, including a prominent Hamsa, the ancient hand symbol for protection, a talisman against the evil eye that Sarah's own grandmother had worn as a pendant. Another, Shimon, sported a mohawk despite being well into his 50s, with arms so heavily muscled they strained the seams of his leather vest, veins like rivers etched from years of wrenching on engines in 120-degree heat. The youngest, Nir, couldn't have been more than 25, but he carried himself with the swagger of someone trying to prove he belonged with these dangerous men, his fresh ink still slightly raised on his knuckles. Geveret Sarah, Yigal said, his voice rough from the cold wind and probably decades of cigarettes smoked under starlit desert skies. Geveret, Mrs., a polite Hebrew title that softened the edge of his gravelly tone. I know this is an imposition, but we've been riding for 12 hours straight. Route 90's completely shut down about 15 kilometers back, and we're not going to make it much further in this weather. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like the pistons of those Harleys outside. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door, to lock it tight, to call the police, or even the nearest IDF checkpoint. These men looked like they could tear her restaurant apart with their bare hands, and probably had done worse to people who'd crossed them. The patches on their vests weren't decorations. They were warnings. Badges of a brotherhood forged in the fires of rebellion and loyalty, much like the biker gangs she'd read about in American magazines, smuggled into the kibbutz as a girl. But then she saw something that gave her pause. Despite their intimidating appearance, they stood respectfully in the swirling sand, waiting for her answer like guests at a Sabbath dinner. None of them pushed forward or tried to force their way in. Yigal kept his hands visible, palms open in a gesture of peace, his posture non-threatening, despite his size that filled the doorway like a shadow. And there was something in his eyes.
Fine.
Exhaustion, yes. But also a kind of desperate hope that she recognized all too well. The same flicker she'd seen in her own mirror on mornings when the grief for Avi hit hardest. How many of you are there? Sarah asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it, to ground this surreal moment in the ordinary rhythm of her world.
Please.
15, the man replied, his voice steady despite the storm. I'm Yigal Baruch. They call me Golan, after the heights up north where I grew up. We're part of the Masada chapter, heading back from a memorial service down in Eilat for one of our own who didn't make it through last year's floods. We've got cash for food and coffee, and we won't cause any trouble, he added, pulling a worn wallet from his vest pocket. The leather cracked like the desert floor after a rain. We just need somewhere warm to wait out the storm. Sarah looked past Yigal at the group of men removing their helmets, shaking off the sand like dogs after a swim in the Dead Sea. They were a terrifying sight up close, beards matted with grit, tattoos peeking from collars, scars that told stories of violence and hard living. Perhaps from their IDF service or from the unforgiving road that linked Tel Aviv's neon to Eilat's coral reefs. Hands that looked like they could crush bone or rebuild an engine from scrap. Faces that had seen the wrong side of too many fights, etched with lines from squinting into sunrises over the Arava Valley. But she also saw something else. exhaustion that went bone deep. The kind that came from fighting the elements for hours on end. Winds that howled like the ghosts of ancient nomads. These men, dangerous as they might be, were at the end of their rope, vulnerable in a way that stripped away the myths and left only humanity. "Come in," she said, stepping aside with a resolve she didn't know she still possessed. "All of you. Wipe your boots, though. The sand's murder on the floors." The relief on Yigal's face was immediate and profound, a crack in his armored exterior that let in a sliver of light. "Thank you, Gevret Sarah," he said simply, his voice dropping to a grateful rumble. "You have no idea what this means. Not just tonight, but in a world that doesn't always open its doors." The guardians of the Negev filed in one by one, stomping sand off their boots and shaking grit from their vests with the careful precision of men who knew the value of borrowed space. They were massive men, most of them, the kind who'd learned to take up space in the world through necessity and reputation, survivors of mandatory army service, economic hardships, and the endless cycle of desert life. Their leather vests creaked as they moved, the patches and pins catching the restaurant's fluorescent light. Chapter names like Masada, evoking the ancient fortress of Jewish rebellion. Galilee, with its misty mountains. Carmel, the coastal ridge where vines clung to rocky soil. Ranks and badges marked territory and allegiances in a world Sarah had never been part of. A subculture thriving on the fringes of Israeli society, where outlaws found family in the roar of engines' dot. But despite their fearsome appearance, they moved carefully in the small restaurant, conscious of their size, respectful of the space they'd been given, like soldiers on leave, mindful not to track mud into a host's home. Shimon, the one with the mohawk that defied his age, actually held the door for the youngest member, Nir, with a gruff, "After you, kid." And Sarah caught several of them wiping their boots extra clean on the mat before stepping onto her tile floor, the grit pattering like rain. Sarah counted them as they entered. 15, just as Yigal had said. The oldest looked to be in his 60s, gray-haired and dignified, despite the Guardian's winged emblem on his vest. His posture straight from years as a tank commander in the Sinai. The youngest, Nir, had nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly as he pulled off his gloves, looking more like a scared new recruit fresh from basic training than a member of Israel's most notorious motorcycle club. He hovered near the edge of the group, his vest still stiff and new, the patches sewn on with uneven stitches that spoke of recent initiation. "Find seats wherever you can," Sarah told them, moving
What will
behind
you
the
have,
counter
gentlemen?
with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd served everyone from Orthodox pilgrims to secular backpackers. "I'll get some coffee going. Maybe some hot mint tea
It is good
if
to
you've
be
got
inside.
a taste for it. It's what my grandmother used to brew during storms like this." The men settled into the booths and counter stools with obvious gratitude, their sand-stiffened leather creaking as they shifted, the sound blending with the storm's muffled roar outside. Up close, Sarah could see the details that the storm had hidden, the intricate artwork of their tattoos, Hebrew script quoting psalms alongside skulls and eagles, the careful maintenance of their patches, sewn with pride, the way they instinctively arranged themselves so that the older, more senior members took the best spots, while the younger ones deferred without being asked. A hierarchy as old as the tribes of Israel. Nir, the young one, sat near the window, still shivering despite the warmth of the restaurant. His fingers tracing the edge of a booth, as if anchoring himself to reality. Menashe, an older man with intricate tattoos covering both arms, and Sergeant at Arms, embroidered beneath his chapter patch, took the stool closest to the counter, nodding respectfully when Sarah made eye contact, his eyes crinkling in a way that reminded her of Avi's uncles at family gatherings. "Haven't seen weather like this in years," Yigal said, settling onto a stool near the register, his massive frame making the seat look comically small. His vest hung open now, revealing more patches. President in bold letters. Service ribbons that suggested a distinguished military background, perhaps commando units in Lebanon, and a small Israeli flag pin that seemed oddly patriotic for someone society labeled an outlaw, a reminder that in Israel, the line between rebel and defender was often blurred by shared history. Sarah poured strong Turkish coffee into thick white mugs, the rich black brew that was a staple of late-night shifts, its aroma cutting through the dust like a promise of comfort. "Sugar is on the counter," she said, sliding the tray forward. "Help yourselves. And if anyone's got a sweet tooth, I've got a bit of halva left in the back. Nothing fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." As the men warmed their hands on the hot mugs, steam rising like desert mirages, Sarah took stock of her situation. 15 guardians of the Negev bikers, a nearly empty freezer with scraps of yesterday's hummus, and a few loaves of pita, and 180 shekels to her name. These weren't the kind of men you wanted to disappoint or turn away hungry. Stories of their runs, charity rides for wounded soldiers, or toy drives for border kids, mingled with darker tales of turf wars. But looking at their faces, weathered, tired, grateful for simple warmth, she realized that beneath the leather and patches and fearsome reputation, they were just human beings caught in a storm, much like the refugees and wanderers who'd passed through her doors over the years. By 10 o'clock, the storm had only gotten worse. The wind howled like a living thing, a banshee from ancient folklore, and the sand mixed with rare desert rain fell so hard that the windows looked like they'd been painted gray, visibility reduced to arm's length. Yigal's prediction about the highway being closed proved optimistic. According to the radio, which Sarah tuned to the local traffic station, Route 90 was shut down in both directions, with no estimate for when it might reopen.
You know,
flash flood
sometimes
warnings
waiting is the
echoing
hardest
across the frequency. A reminder of how quickly the Negev could turn from arid wasteland to raging torrent.
We have a responsibility to act.
Could be 2 days.
For the sake of all our
Yigal
people.
told Sarah as she refilled his coffee for the 3rd time, the pot now nearly empty. The traffic police aren't even trying to clear it until the wind dies down. We've got brothers stuck in worse spots down south. Elots flooding like the Nile in flood season. Sarah nodded, doing mental calculations that didn't add up, no matter how she worked them. 15 men, 2 days. Virtually no food left in the kitchen. The shakshuka and falafel were long gone. The fresh pita a distant memory from the morning rush that never came. She'd managed to find a few cans of soup in the back storage room. Chickpea stew with tahini, a staple for lean times. But that wouldn't stretch far among appetites honed by the road. Her 180 shekels might buy enough groceries for one day if the roads were clear and the stores in Arad were open, which they weren't. Shutters battened against the gale dot. The bikers had settled in for the night, some dozing in the booths with heads on folded arms, others playing cards with a worn deck that Shimon had produced from his vest pocket, poker with shekel bets, laughter low and rumbling like thunder retreating. They'd offered to pay for their meal, pulling out crumpled bills with genuine insistence. But Sarah had waved them off with a smile that masked her worry. How could she charge them for the scraps she'd managed to cobble together? A shared pot of lentil soup, slices of bread dipped in olive oil, and the last of the olives from a jar her neighbor had gifted. It was Haknesat Orkin, the Jewish tradition of hospitality to strangers, something Avi had lived by. Turning strangers into friends with a hot meal and a listening ear. Near had fallen asleep with his head on the table, exhaustion finally overtaking him like a merciful wave. He looked even younger in sleep, maybe 22 or 23, with the kind of face that belonged in a university lecture hall in Jerusalem, rather than on the back of a Harley thundering through checkpoints. Menashe had draped his leather vest over the kid's shoulders, a gesture so gentle it made Sarah's throat tight, the older man's calloused hand lingering a moment as if blessing his son. "He reminds me of my boy," Menashe explained quietly when he caught Sarah watching, his voice a low murmur over the card game. "Same age, same stubborn streak, always trying to prove he's tougher than he really is. Riding into storms like this one without a second thought." "Where's your son now?" Sarah asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee to steady her nerves, the bitterness grounding her. "Serving on the Gaza border," Menashe replied, his eyes distant, fixed on the window where rain streaked the glass. "Third tour. Comes home next month if all goes well. Passes his sergeant's course. Maybe gets stationed up north, where the hills roll green instead of this endless sand." His voice carried the weight of a father's worry, the kind that never really went away, no matter how old your children got, amplified in a land where every young man and woman traded textbooks for rifles. At 1-8. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, surveying her unexpected guests under the harsh fluorescent light that buzzed like a persistent insect. They looked less intimidating than they had when they'd first arrived, the storm's drama stripping away some of the menace. Their leather vests hung over chair backs, revealing ordinary clothes underneath. Simple shirts faded from too many washes, worn jeans patched at the knees, work boots that had seen better days, but still carried the polish of pride. These were working men, tough Israelis who probably had more in common with her late husband than with the movie stereotype she'd half expected. Grizzled loners, chasing freedom on the open road. No, these were fathers, brothers, veterans who'd traded uniforms for leathers, but kept the same code. Protect your own. Ride through hell for the pack. Yigal approached the counter, his expression serious as he set down his empty mug with a soft clink. "Sarah, we need to talk about payment. You've been more than generous. But we can't just..." "Don't worry about it," Sarah interrupted, wiping the counter with a rag that had seen better days. The motion automatic, a shield against vulnerability. It's just food. Leftover soup isn't going to break the bank. Or make it, for that matter. "No, it's not," Yigal said firmly, his blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pause. "It's Haknesat Orkim, welcoming the stranger, the mitzvah that keeps the world turning. It's kindness, and it's costing you money you probably don't have. We've all been there, staring at empty registers after a long haul." Sarah felt her cheeks flush under his gaze. Was her financial situation that obvious? Laid bare like the desert after a windstorm? She tried to keep her voice steady, injecting a touch of humor to deflect. "I manage just fine. Besides, in this weather, You'd have to be crazy to turn away a hot meal. Crazy or suicidal? Yigal's eyes moved to the eviction notice sticking out from under the register like a guilty secret, the corner curling from humidity, and Sarah realized her attempt at discretion had failed spectacularly. His expression softened with understanding, lines deepening around his mouth. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly, leaning in as if sharing a confidence over Sabbath wine. 7 days, Sarah admitted, the words falling out of her mouth before she could stop them, heavy as stones in the Jordan River. "But that's my problem, not yours. I've got no right dragging strangers into my mess." "The hell it is," Yigal said, his voice dropping to a growl that was more protective than angry. "You opened your door to us when you didn't have to. Could have left us out there to fend for the night in some wadi. You fed us when you couldn't afford to, sharing what little you had, like it was a feast. That makes it our problem too. In our world, debts like that aren't forgotten. They're repaid with interest." Sarah shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips despite the knot in her stomach. "I appreciate the sentiment, Yigal, but there's nothing you can do. I'm behind on 3 months of payments, and the bank's not interested in sad stories or mitzvahs. They want shekels, cold and hard." Yigal was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug as if drawing strength from its fading warmth. The storm outside punctuated the silence with a gust that rattled the sign, the neon oasis flickering like a heartbeat. Then he looked up at her, with eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses, past the widow's resolve to the woman who'd buried her dreams with her husband. "Tell me about this place," he said, his tone shifting to something gentler, inviting. "How long have you owned it?
Sarah.
What made you and your man
Sarah,
pick this
tell me what happened."
godforsaken stretch of highway?" 15 years, Sarah replied, surprised at how easily the words came, like unstopping a dam. She leaned on the counter, the wood cool under her elbows. "My husband, Avi, and I bought it with my grandmother's inheritance. Nothing much, but enough for a down payment on a dream. It was his idea. Really. He was a truck driver, did long hauls from Haifa ports to the Dead Sea Works.
He had a dream of filling this place,
Saw how lonely
making
the
it
road
an
could
oasis.
be. Wanted a place where travelers could find a hot meal and a friendly face no matter what time of night they rolled in. Like an oasis, he called it. Straight out of the Bible." Yigal nodded, a spark of recognition in his eyes. Sounds like he was a good man. The kind who understood that the desert doesn't just test you, it reveals you. "The best," Sarah said, her voice catching slightly on the memory. Avi's laugh echoing in the empty booths. "Cancer took him 2 years ago. Quick and cruel, like a sniper's bullet. I've been trying to keep the place running, scraping by on memories and good intentions, but..." She gestured helplessly at the empty restaurant, the flickering lights casting long shadows, the general air of barely controlled decay, the peeling paint on the walls, the menu board with prices unchanged since the last election. "But it's hard to run a business on ghosts and grit alone." "Something like that," Yigal finished for her, his voice laced with empathy born of loss. He was quiet again, and Sarah could see him thinking, weighing options she couldn't guess at, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the mug like Morse code for hope. Finally, he spoke, leaning closer. "What if I told you that you've helped more people than you know? That this little spot on the map has ripples that reach farther than you can see?" Sarah frowned, wiping a stray drop of coffee from the counter. "What do you mean?" I'm just a diner lady serving up shawarma to the weary. 15 years is a long time, Yigal said, his smile faint but genuine. A lot of travelers pass through this stretch of highway. Truckers dodging deadlines, soldiers on leave, families fleeing the city for a weekend by the sea. A lot of people in trouble looking for help. You remember all of them? Every face. Every story? Sarah shook her head, a soft laugh escaping despite herself. There have been thousands. You try to, but the road keeps moving, and so do they. But you helped them all, didn't you? Yigal pressed gently. Hot coffee on a cold night. A warm meal when the wallet's light. Maybe a kind word when they needed it most. Like a verse from Proverbs come to life. I tried to, Sarah said, her voice softening as memories flooded in. The young couple from Tel Aviv arguing over directions. The Bedouin trader sharing tales of the Sinai. The off-duty cop nursing a beer after a shift. Avi always said we were supposed to be a light for people. A beacon, you know. Someone who'd leave the porch light on for travelers, no questions asked. Yigal smiled, and there was something almost secretive about it, like he held a map to buried treasure. A beacon, he repeated, savoring the word. Yeah, that's exactly what you are. And beacons don't burn out alone. They call others to the flame. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, before she could press for the secret lurking in his eyes, a commotion arose from one of the booths. Shimon was shaking near awake, his voice urgent but gentle, like a big brother coaxing a sibling from a fever dream. Kid, wake up. You're having a nightmare. Easy now. It's just the wind.
Wake up, kid.
Tricks. Nir jerked upright, his eyes wild and unfocused, sweat beating on his forehead.
Wake up,
despite
son.
the chill.
It's time to go.
For a moment, he looked around the restaurant like he couldn't remember where he was, his breath coming in sharp gasps that echoed the storm's fury. Then recognition dawned. The warm glow of the lights, the murmur of voices, the scent of coffee, and his shoulders sagged with relief, tension draining like water from a cracked jug. Sorry, he mumbled, rubbing his face with hands that still trembled. Bad dreams. They come and go, sneak up like shadows in the wadis. Want to talk about it? Shimon asked, settling back into his seat across from the younger man, his mohawk casting a wild silhouette against the window. The card game paused, the others glancing over with quiet concern. The Brotherhood's unspoken rule. No man rides alone, not even in sleep. Nir shook his head at first, but after a moment, he spoke anyway, his voice barely above a whisper, threaded with the raw edge of confession. It's always the same dream. I'm lost on some dark desert highway. Route 90 maybe, or the old Arava road. My bike's broken down, chain snapped or tire shredded.
I am sorry.
There's nowhere to go. No lights, no help, just endless darkness swallowing me whole. The sand shifting like it's alive,
I can't leave.
pulling me under. He paused, glancing around the warm restaurant at the faces of his fellow
Tôi đã mơ một
riders,
giấc mơ rất kinh
at
khủng.
Sarah behind the
Nó
counter,
thật tăm tối,
watching with
vắng lặng
quiet
và lạnh lẽo.
compassion. But then
Tôi chỉ có
I
một mình.
wake up, and I'm here. And it's okay. The light's on, and the world's not as empty as it seems. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she couldn't quite name. A deep, resonant chord struck by his words. How many people had sat in these same booths, found comfort in this same warm light, filtering through sand-scratched windows? How many travelers had been lost and cold and desperate, only to find refuge in the unlikely beacon she and Avi had built on this forgotten stretch of desert highway, where the Dead Sea's salt flats met the Judean hills. She looked at Yigal, who was watching her with that same knowing smile, his beard twitching with suppressed amusement. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, crossing her arms, a spark of curiosity cutting through her fatigue. "Nothing you won't figure out soon enough," he replied, his tone light but laced with promise. "But right now, we need to focus on practical matters. You said the bank wants 3 months of back payments. How much are we talking? Ballpark. No shame in it." Sarah nodded reluctantly, the number sticking in her throat like dry pita. 45,000 shekels, she admitted, the figure hanging in the air like a verdict. Plus late fees and legal costs. It's probably closer to 55,000 by now. More than a
How much is
year's
it now,
take on
Sarah?
a good month. Yigal whistled low, a sound that carried across the room and drew a few heads. That's serious money, the kind that could buy a fleet of bikes or bury a man in debt. "More than I'll ever have," Sarah said, her voice steady but edged with resignation, the weight of it settling like dust on her shoulders. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Really, it's kind of you. But 55,000 shekels isn't the kind of thing you find in couch cushions or a lucky lottery ticket. This place is finished, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time to let go. Find a little apartment in Beersheba. Knit sweaters for the grandkids I don't have yet." "No," Yigal said, his voice sharp enough to cut through her resignation like a knife through silk, rising just enough to command attention without waking the sleepers. He leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them. "It's not time. Not for a place like this, with walls that have heard confessions and
No.
laughter in equal measure. Not for a woman like you, who's kept the flame alive through worse than a sandstorm." He stood up abruptly, fishing his cell phone out of his pocket. The screen cracked, but functional. A
This
veteran's
place,
tool.
these walls.
"I'm
They've
going
heard
to make
so
some
many
calls.
stories.
And Sarah," he added, pausing with his hand on the door, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that brooked no argument. "Don't you dare give up yet. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot. The desert has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." As Yigal walked toward the front door, presumably to get better cell reception amid the static of the storm,
Don't you dare
Sarah
give up.
found herself staring after him, the door swinging shut with a chime that sounded like fate knocking. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't know what kind of calls he intended to make, or what difference they could possibly make in the face of bank ledgers and legal fine print. But for the first time in months, since the day she'd scattered Avi's ashes into the wind over the ancient ruins of Avdat, she felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope, fragile as a desert bloom after rain, but real nonetheless. It warmed her more than the coffee ever could. Yigal returned from making his phone calls with sand in his hair, and an expression Sarah couldn't read. A mix of satisfaction and secrecy, like a poker player holding aces. He'd been outside for nearly an hour, pacing back and forth in the storm, his voice occasionally rising above the wind as he barked orders into the phone. Words like, "Rally the chapters," and "Tell them it's for the angel snatches," Sarah caught through the glass. The other bikers had watched him through the windows, exchanging glances that suggested they knew something she didn't. A shared language of nods and half-smiles passed down through rides and rights. "Well?" Shimon asked when Yigal finally came back inside, stamping sand off his boots with enough force to send a small dune across the floor.
Chihoy.
The mohawked veteran leaned back in his booth, cards fanned in his hand like a challenge. "Tomorrow morning," Yigal said simply, shaking water from his ponytail before reclaiming his stool. Maybe sooner if the road's clear and the floods don't wash out the bridges. Beersheba chapter's already gearing up. 40 rigs, minimum. "What's tomorrow morning?" Sarah asked. Her curiosity piqued, despite the exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. She refilled his mug automatically, the ritual anchor in the uncertainty dark. But Yigal just smiled, that enigmatic curve of his lips, and poured himself another cup of coffee, the steam curling like smoke signals. It was Menashe who broke the tension, the older biker setting down his cards with a decisive snap. He'd been quiet most of the evening, content to observe from his stool, nursing his coffee like a sage at a council fire. But now he was studying Sarah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. "You know," he said slowly, drawing out the words like taffy, "you look familiar. Not just any familiar, like I've seen your face in a story, heard your name whispered around campfires on rides." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a skeptical half-smile playing on her lips as she wiped down the espresso machine. "I doubt that. I don't get out much these days. Haven't left this stretch of road in months, unless you count trips to the bank to beg for extensions."
Only sadness.
"No, I'm serious," Menashe insisted, sitting forward,
Cannot let this happen.
his head tilted slightly, as if trying to
cannot let this
remember
happen.
something important, buried in the sands of time. "How long did you say you've been running this place? 15 years? And before that?" "Before that, Avi and I lived in Jerusalem," Sarah replied, humoring him as she might a tipsy customer spinning yarns. He was a truck driver, did long hauls all over the country,
I'm worried about
from the
bank.
ports in Ashdod to the factories in
That's
the
all I need to
north.
hear.
I worked as a dispatcher for his company, coordinating routes, dodging delays from security checks and weather like this. Menashe snapped his fingers suddenly, so loudly that several of the other bikers looked up, the card game halting mid-bet. "That's it, Ofer Levy. You saved Ofer Levy's
I
life.
worked as a waitress.
Big guy,
and
red
Avi,
beard like
my
a
husband,
Viking,
was a truck driver.
drove for Karen Transport
I was
out of
just a
Haifa.
kid then, really.
Sarah frowned,
It felt like we were always
the
driving.
name tugging at a thread in her memory. "I'm sorry, I don't..." This would have been maybe 12, 13 years ago. Menashe barreled on, getting excited now, his voice rising with the thrill of recollection. Gestures
No, not a
broad
Viking.
as if
He
painting
was a
the
desert
scene in the
wanderer,
air.
a man of
He was
legend.
having chest pains, bad ones, the kind that feel like an elephant sitting on your ribs, pulled off right here at your restaurant, sweating bullets in the cab of his rig. The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow, vivid as yesterday despite the years. She hadn't thought about that night in ages,
To paint a picture.
but suddenly it unfolded before her. A trucker, alone and scared, clutching his chest in the parking lot under a moon as full as the harvest kind. She'd found him there when she'd gone out to check the dumpster for strays, his face pale as matzah, breath ragged. Called Megan David Adam, the emergency service, Israel's red and white ambulances that raced to scenes of accidents and heart attacks alike, then driven him to the hospital herself when the ambulance couldn't make it through a flash flood on the highway, the wipers battling sheets of rain as she gripped the wheel, praying aloud in the Hebrew of her childhood. "Ofer," she said quietly, the name unlocking
tell
the
me you're here.
floodgates.
Tell me you're
I
close.
remember Ofer. God. That night, the rain was biblical. Roads turning to rivers. He made it though. Triple bypass. But he pulled through. Menashe grinned now, a wide, triumphant beam that transformed his scarred face. "He's my brother-in-law. Married my sister 5 years ago. Quiet ceremony in the Galilee hills. He tells that story at every family gathering. How the angel in the desert saved his life. How you stayed with him at the hospital all night. Held his hand while the doctors poked and prodded. Called his wife in a panic. Even paid for his parking when he couldn't find his wallet in the chaos. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. A blush born of embarrassment and the warmth of the table. It wasn't anything special. Anyone would have done the same. It's what you do out here, where help's a radio call away.
Even the smallest
But sometimes
details of her
you
kindness
have to be the
were
call.
not forgotten.
No, Menashe said firmly, shaking his head with the conviction of a man who stared down worse. Anyone wouldn't have. That's the point. You went beyond, turned a stranger's crisis into a story of grace. That's why truckers call you the Angel of Route 90. He looked around the restaurant at his fellow bikers, his voice carrying like a rallying cry. Guys, I think we're sitting in a legend. This ain't just a diner. It's holy ground for road warriors. The word legend seemed to electrify the group, a current passing through the room like the first rumble of engines at dawn. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, voices overlapping in a cacophony of memory and mirth, the storm forgotten in the glow of shared revelation. It turned out that several of them had their own memories of Oasis Junction, their own reasons to be grateful to the woman who ran it. Tales that wove a tapestry of kindness, spanning the length of Israel. Rafikama, a burly rider from the Jerusalem chapter, with a beard braided like a sailor's. Recalled stopping here 5 years ago when his daughter had been in a car accident near Beersheva, a pile-up on the old road to the Negev, twisted metal and sirens. I was a wreck, Sarah. Pulling up here shaking. No signal on my phone. You let me use the landline. Gave me directions
It's time
to
that we
Soroka
recognize
Hospital,
what you have done for us.
the fastest route through the checkpoints. Even packed me a ceviche, pita stuffed with eggplant and egg, tahini dripping, for the road when I'd been too upset to think about eating. Got there in time to hold her hand through the stitches. She's 12 now. Rides her own scooter. Calls you the sandwich savior every time we pass this exit. Shimon chimed in next, his mohawk bobbing as he laughed, dealing cards absent-mindedly. Me? Night like this one, 3 years back. Sandstorm so bad my butt coughed out halfway from Demona. Chain jumped, left me stranded with a busted knee from the fall. You and Avi not only fed me, best bowl of lentil soup I've had, with that lemon squeeze that cuts a heavy, but let me crash in the back room till dawn. Avi stayed up half the night helping me fix the chain, refusing payment for the parts or the labor. Pay it forward, brother, he said. Damn if I didn't. Sponsored a kid's ride from Make-A-Wish last year because of that. The stories flowed like wine at a wedding, each one building on the last, painting Sarah not as a simple restaurateur, but as a quiet guardian of the road. And then Near,
They saved us.
quiet, nervous Near, the one who'd been haunted by dreams, suddenly spoke up.
It's good work.
His voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of thunder. The room hushed, all eyes turning to him as he straightened, fingers twisting the edge of his vest. You might not remember me, he said, addressing Sarah directly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time, vulnerable as a fawn in the headlights. But I was here 3 years ago. I was having a really bad time. Parents kicked me out after I flunked out of my pre-army program, lost my job slinging falafel in a Tel Aviv stall. No direction, no money, just rage and a beat-up bike I bought with scrap savings. I was riding south with no plan, no hope, the wind whipping at me like it wanted to push me off the edge. I was actually thinking about it. I paused, swallowed hard, the words sticking like thorns. Well, about ending it all. One last ride into the nothing. Sarah felt her breath catch, a vice tightening around her heart. She remembered now. A skinny kid with hollow eyes and a motorcycle that sounded like it was held together with prayer and duct tape, rattling into the lot just before closing. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone who'd given up on tomorrow, the shadow of despair that clung to the lost souls of a nation scarred by conflict and loss. I stopped here because my bike was almost out of gas, and I was almost out of everything else. Neil continued, his voice gaining strength from the telling, tears glistening but unshed. I had maybe 20 shekels in my pocket, barely enough for a coffee, but you served me anyway. A full meal. Shakshuka bubbling with eggs and tomatoes, coffee black as midnight, even a slice of baklava for dessert, sticky with honey and nuts. When I tried to pay, fumbling with the coins, you said I looked like I was having a rough day, and the meal was on the house. No judgment, no questions, just kindness. He leaned forward, gesturing around the table at his fellow bikers, who nodded in silent solidarity. You asked me where I was headed, casual as pouring tea, and when I said I didn't know, hell, I didn't even know if I wanted to be headed anywhere. You told me that was okay. Sometimes, not knowing where you're going is the first step to finding where you belong, you said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Then, you gave me a business card for a friend of yours in Beersheba, a mechanic who owed Avi a favor. Said he might have work for someone willing to learn. No experience required. Sarah's mind raced back. Yes, that kid. The one who'd lingered at the counter, picking at his food while the night deepened. She'd slipped him the card on impulse, Avi's old contact. A man who'd fixed trucks for half the fleet in the South. That job changed my life, Near went on. His eyes bright now
It's
with
a journey,
the fire of survival.
not a destination.
The mechanic, he became like a father to me. Taught me more than engines. How to stand tall when life kicks you down. Helped me get back on track. Get my head straight for the Army deferral. Even introduced me to these guys when I needed a crew that rode as hard as I did. He gestured around the table, a sweep that encompassed the gruff faces, softened by his tail. You saved my life that day, Sarah. Not just by feeding me, but by reminding me that there were still good people in the world. People who cared about strangers. Who saw the spark when you couldn't. The restaurant fell silent except for the wind outside lashing the windows and the soft hum of the coffee machine, a requiem for the moment. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations. Each story a brick in a wall she'd never known she'd built. She'd helped people over the years, sure. It was the rhythm of the place, the pulse of hospitality, in a land where strangers became kin over shared plates. But she'd never thought of it as anything extraordinary. She'd just done what felt right, what Avi would have wanted her to do. Keep the door open, the pot simmering, the light burning against the dark. There are more stories, Yigal said quietly, breaking the hush with a voice like gravel under tires. A lot more. Truckers who've named routes after you. Soldiers who've tattooed your sign on their arms. You've been a beacon on this highway for 15 years, Sarah. You've touched more lives than you know, woven threads into a net that catches the falling. I just served food, Sarah protested weakly, sinking onto a stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly unsteady as the full import sank in. Listened when they talked, poured when the cups ran dry. Nothing heroic about that. Exactly. Menashe said, reaching across to pat her hand with a gentleness belying his size. In a world that's gotten pretty indecent, rockets in the night, bills piling like dunes, that makes you special. A quiet hero in an apron, the kind the Bible would sing about. Sarah sank deeper into the stool, her mind reeling with faces half remembered.
Passed through that place.
The elderly Holocaust survivor recounting Warsaw over tea.
You know more
The
than
young
you think.
Arab couple from Hebron sharing peace dreams amid tension. The lone hitchhiker from Ethiopia with tales of migration. She'd fed them all, listened to their stories under the hum of fluorescent lights, offered what comfort she could from a kitchen stocked with the flavors of the Levant, cumin and sumac, olives and yogurt. It had never occurred to her that she was doing anything remarkable, that her small acts rippled outward like stones in the Sea of Galilee. The calls I made tonight, Yigal said, his tone shifting to business, though his eyes held the warmth of conspiracy. They were to people like Ofer Levy, people who remember this place, who remember you, not as a name on a sign, but as the hand that pulled them from the brink. People who owe you a debt they've never been able to repay, carried like a stone in their saddlebags. You don't owe me anything, Sarah said, shaking her head, though the words felt hollow now, eroded by the tide of testimony. That's where you're wrong, Yigal replied, his voice firm as bedrock. And tomorrow morning, or tonight, if the stars align, you're going to understand just how wrong. As if summoned by his words, new lights appeared outside the windows. Not the single headlight of motorcycles this time, but the dual beams of cars and trucks cutting through the storm like stars breaking through clouds over the Golan. Headlights bobbed in the haze, engines growling low as vehicles defied the weather, tires churning sand into mud. Yigal looked out the window and smiled, a full grin that revealed teeth yellowed by time, but straight with purpose. Or maybe tonight, the desert doesn't wait for perfect weather. The first vehicle to pull into the parking lot was a battered pickup truck with northern plates from the Galilee,
There is no turning
its
back.
wipers slapping furiously. Then came a sedan from Tel Aviv, sleek despite the grime, followed by a semi-truck with Eilat markings, its air brakes hissing like a sigh of relief. Within minutes, the small parking lot was filling up with vehicles, their occupants climbing out into the storm, huddled figures in rain gear and keffiyehs, hurrying toward the restaurant's front door with the determination of pilgrims to a shrine. Sarah watched in amazement as the door opened and people began filing in. Men and women of all ages, all looking around the restaurant with expressions of recognition and gratitude, as if returning to a childhood home long lost. Some she remembered instantly, the red-bearded giant from Menashe's tale. Others were strangers, faces etched with the road's toll, but they all wore the same look of people coming home, shedding coats and hats in a cascade of sand and water dot. The first person through the door was a big man with a red beard that glowed like embers under the lights, his arms spread wide as he barreled forward, boots thumping the floor. "Sarah Cohen!" he boomed, his voice a bass rumble that drowned the storm. "You beautiful angel of the sands. Ofer Levy, in case you don't remember this ugly mug. You saved my worthless hide 13 years ago. Drove me through that flood like Moses parting the waters. And I've been looking for a chance to return the favor ever since." As Ofer enveloped her in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet, his laughter shaking them both like an earthquake, Sarah realized that Yigal had been right. This story wasn't over. It was just beginning, unfolding in the warm chaos of her diner, where the Negev's wild heart met the quiet strength of one woman's kindness. By dawn, Oasis Junction looked like the epicenter of the biggest guardians of the Negev gathering in Israeli history. A thunder of chrome and leather that turned the parking lot into a makeshift rally ground. What had started with 15 stranded bikers had grown into something Sarah couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. A brotherhood mobilized across the land. The lot was packed with motorcycles, dozens and dozens of them. Harleys, Indians, custom choppers, their chrome gleaming in the tentative morning sun that pierced the clearing skies, arranged in neat rows that stretched beyond the restaurant's property line, like soldiers at attention. Engines ticked cool as riders dismounted, the air thick with the scent of exhaust and wet earth. A new day's promise after the night's fury. Sarah moved through the crowded restaurant in a daze, accepting hugs from leather-clad men and women whose faces triggered forgotten memories, each embrace a chapter revived. These weren't just random bikers. They were guardians of the Negev from chapters across Israel, each wearing their colors proudly, despite the early hour. Vests adorned with eagles and flames, Hebrew mottos like ride or die, stitched in bold thread. The booths overflowed, counter stools claimed. Even the back storage room pressed into service with folding chairs, scavenged from who knows where. Laughter mingled with the sizzle of fresh pita on the grill, which Sarah manned with help from a volunteer crew. Flipping eggs and chopping cucumbers in a frenzy of renewed purpose. I still can't believe this, she murmured to Yigal, who was coordinating the controlled chaos from the counter, his phone buzzing like a hive as he directed traffic, literal and figurative. One night of soup, and suddenly, my diner's the center of the universe. When word got out through the network that Yigal Baruch's Masada chapter was stranded at Sarah Cohen's place, said Menashe, the tattooed sergeant-at-arms, clapping her on the shoulder with a grin. Every chapter within 500 kilometers started moving. Galilee sent 20 from the hills. Carmel rolled 30 from the coast. The Angel of Route 90 isn't just a trucker legend. Bikers know that name too. Whisper it around bonfires after nights. You've got more debts owed than the National Treasury. Sarah looked around in amazement, the room a kaleidoscope of patches and faces. Tel Aviv's urban wolves with their city ink. Jerusalem's hill riders with mezuzahs dangling from handlebars. Haifa's pork toughs, smelling of salt and diesel. Beersheva's desert foxes with eyes sharp as falcons. Men who normally wouldn't be caught dead in the same room, rival chapters nursing old grudges from turf spats, were sharing coffee and stories at her counter, bonds forged in the fire of her hospitality. A massive man with Tel Aviv stitched on his back and arms like tree trunks lumbered over, his handshake engulfing hers. 23 years ago, Rafi Tiger Haddad said, his voice surprisingly gentle for his size, eyes soft with memory. You found me passed out in your parking lot, dehydrated, nearly heat-stroked after a run from the Dead Sea in 45-degree hell. Bike overheated, me along with it. You called Megan David Adam, rode with me to the clinic in Arad, even called my old lady in Bat Yam to let her know I was alive. Not to worry. Stayed till they hooked me to an IV, cracking jokes about my sunburn to keep me from panicking.
She had the kindest voice I ever heard.
The memory slowly surfacing like a submarine from the depths. A younger man, barely conscious, his bike a smoking wreck in the brutal midday sun. skin blistered red as pomegranates. "Rafi Tiger Haddad," he said, holding her hand a moment longer. "President of the Tel Aviv chapter. I owe you my life. Named my second born after you, Sarit. Little Spitfire on a pink scooter now." The stories kept coming. A torrent that swelled the room's energy. A biker from Haifa whose carburetor had seized in a dust devil. Sarah and Avi had let him sleep in the restaurant while waiting for parts from a supplier in Ashdod, sharing breakfast and tales of the sea. A writer from Jerusalem whose wife had gone into labor unexpectedly. Sarah had given him directions to Hadassah Hospital, the quickest path through the winding roads of the Judean hills, and a thermos of strong tea for the vigil. Even a few women guardians, rare but fierce, shared their pieces. One from the Carmel chapter, recounting how Sarah had mended her torn vest after a spill, stitching with thread from Avi's kit, while dispensing advice on balancing ride and family dot. As the morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last clouds, Yigal approached with a thick envelope in hand, its bulk straining the paper, the weight of salvation. He gathered the crowd with a raised fist, the room quieting like a congregation before prayer. 250,000 shekels, he announced, the number landing like a benediction. Cash from every chapter represented here. Galilee, Carmel, Masada, all of them. Door donations from brothers who couldn't ride in the weather. IOUs from those who will. Sarah stared at the envelope, hands trembling as Yigal pressed it into her palm, the bills crisp and real, a fortune born of leather wallets and loyal hearts. This is too much. I only needed 55,000 to square the bank. The rest, you can and you will. Rafi Tiger Haddad interrupted,
from your brothers
his
and
voice
sisters
carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed, stepping forward with the envelope like an offering. This money comes with conditions, no take-backs. "What conditions?" Sarah asked, her voice a whisper amid the murmurs. "You keep this place running," said a woman biker from Beersheba, the first female guardian of the Negev Sarah had ever met up close, tough as nails, with a ponytail streaked blue and a vest patched with Road Mother. She grinned, fierce and fond. "You keep being the angel you've always been. Hot coffee for the lost, an ear for the
There's always a
weary.
condition, isn't there?
No closing these doors
condition?
on a soul in need." Yigal produced a rolled paper from his saddlebag, an architect's drawing, crisp lines depicting the restaurant expanded with a proper biker lounge, padded booths for long hauls, a secure garage for motorcycles shielded from sandstorms, maintenance bays stocked with tools gleaming like promises. "Oasis Junction Biker Haven," he explained, unrolling it on the counter for all to see, fingers tracing the blueprint. "Official rest stop for every Guardians of the Negev chapter, from the Golan Heights to Eilat's shores. We'll guarantee regular business, monthly runs, charity stops. Provide security so no lowlifes think twice about trouble. Handle maintenance on the building and the rigs. You're not just surviving anymore. You're the hub."
Yeah.
A grizzled veteran from Haifa stepped forward.
I like that.
His vest faded from decades of salt air, voice rough as barnacles. "We're also setting up a protection detail, rotating watches, eyes on the horizon. Nobody messes with this place or you ever again. You're under the Guardians of the Negev's wing now, Sarah. Our oasis, our light." The old two-way radio
here for you.
suddenly crackled to life on the shelf, static giving way to a voice thick with excitement. "Breaker 19, this is Road Dog calling for the Angel." We got 40 bikes rolling your way from Beersheva, ETA 30 minutes. Full chapter, plus prospects hauling supplies. Sarah picked up the microphone with shaking hands, the weight of it familiar yet transformed. Her voice steady as she keyed the button. Road dog, this is Oasis Junction. The angel heard through the grapevine you were in trouble. Flash flood on the approach. Beersheva chapter is rolling hot to help out. We ain't letting anything happen to our guardian angel. Coffee's brewing. Pita's hot. Over. The response crackled back.
This is Sarah.
Laced with whoops.
We are all clear
Copy
here.
that, Angel.
Over.
Road dog out. See you in the dust. The cheer that erupted from the packed restaurant rattled the windows, a roar that blended with the revving engines outside, creating a thunder that echoed off the desert hills like an ancient battle cry.
Copy that.
Fists
We're on our
pumped, backs slapped. Strangers becoming kin in the alchemy of gratitude. Yigal approached with one final envelope, smaller but no less precious, his expression solemn as he handed it over. This is from Ofer Levy. He's a prospect with our Jerusalem chapter now. Traded the big rig for a softail after you gave him that second chance. Used to haul freight till the heart scare. Now he runs security for us. Inside was his old business card, edges frayed from years in a wallet, and a note scrawled in blocky Hebrew. 13 years I carried this, a talisman against bad days. Time to bring it home where it belongs. Thank you for giving me a second chance at life, and at family. Your brother in the wind, Ofer. As the various chapter presidents began discussing logistics for the expanded operation, blueprints poured over like sacred scrolls. Supply runs plotted on napkins. Sarah found herself outside, the sun warming her face as she looked at the sea of motorcycles that filled every available space. Chrome and steel gleamed in the sunlight, handlebars like antlers. Tanks painted with murals of eagles soaring over dunes. The patches told stories of brotherhood, loyalty, and a code of honor most people would never understand. A subculture thriving in the shadow of tanks and minarets, where outlaws played philanthropists under the same blue sky. Yigal approached, his own bike loaded and ready, saddlebags bulging with the road's essentials. He swung a leg over the seat, the engine purring to life beneath him like a contented beast. You know what the best part of all this is? He said, helmet in hand, voice cutting through the din. Last night, you didn't see guardians of the Negev, or outlaws, or patched vests. You just saw 15 men who needed help. Cold, beat, human, and you
desert
opened
is
your
still a
door
dangerous
without
place,
a second
Sarah.
thought. That's what started this avalanche. No agendas, no calculations. Just heart. Sarah nodded, tears pricking her eyes against the brightness. Avi's presence beside her, as real as the wind shifting sands. What now, Golan? For you? For them? He revved the throttle. A throaty growl that silenced nearby chatter. We ride, Sarah, always. But we'll be back. First full moon. Chapters converging. Keep the light on, Angel. And don't worry. You've got the most powerful protection in Israel watching over this place now. Not just fists and engines, but the kind that echoes in stories told around campfires from Dan to Beersheva. As the Masada chapter rode out, their engines creating a symphony of power that vibrated through the ground, Sarah felt Avi's presence beside her, strong as the hills. She could almost hear his voice, teasing and proud. I told you this place would be special, Habibi. I just never imagined it would become the heart of something this big. A haven where the road-weary find their way home. 6 months later, Oasis Junction Biker Haven was featured in a national news magazine, Haaretz Weekend, splashed across glossy pages as the unlikely sanctuary of the Negev's rebels, hailed as the most important guardians of the Negev gathering spot in Israel, a testament to redemption on 2 wheels. The parking lot had been expanded to accommodate over 100 bikes, gravel leveled, and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Yet the heart remained open, a mural of a winged eagle over an oasis, painted by a Haifa artist with a prospects patch. Security was legendary. No thefts reported, no drunks causing scenes. Within 50 kilometers of Sarah's place, whispers of guardian territory, enough to deter troublemakers from as far as the West Bank. But Sarah didn't need magazine recognition or headlines in Yediot Aharonot to know what she'd accomplished. Every day brought bikers from chapters across Israel, Masada's Hill Riders, Galilee's Misty Ghosts, Carmel's Coastal Wolves, all finding exactly what they needed in her corner of the desert. Respect earned over steaming plates of moussaka or malawach. Good food spiced with stories. And the knowledge that they were welcome, no matter the patch or the past. The old 2-way radio crackled constantly with bikers calling in from the road. "How's our angel doing tonight? Got room for a lone wolf from Eilat." Voices from Dimona to the Golan,
Hey Sarah, this is Coyote.
weaving a web
Just
of
checking in.
connection. Sarah always answered the same way, keying the mic with a smile that reached her eyes. The light's on, the coffee's hot,
This is Sarah.
and the roads are always open for family.
Go ahead, over.
Because that's what
Just
Oasis
remember,
Junction
no matter how
had
tough the
become.
road gets, the
The
Oasis
unofficial
Junction is always
headquarters
here
of the
for you.
guardians of the Negev's hospitality. Proof that respect and kindness could bridge any gap. Between chapters, between strangers, between the scars of history and the hope of tomorrow. In a land of ancient promises and modern struggles, it stood as a beacon, unyielding as the rocks of Masada. The light would always guide them home, through storms and sands, to the oasis where hearts, like engines, found their roar again.